Welcome everyone to this public seminar in Oxford, and I'm really pleased to introduce my research fellow and colleague Samantha K. Johnston, who will be together with us and presenting this study. I'm Therese Hopfenbeck. I'm a professor in educational assessment, and I'm a director of Oxford University Centre of Educational Assessment. And the research project we will report from today is funded by the International Baccalaureate, and we will thank them for this opportunity also to do research. Originally, this project started before the pandemic, so it's one of these projects which was planned to be conducted together with teachers and students in their schools. But as you are aware of, life changed completely, and we have actually conducted most of this study online. Sam and I will present together, and with not much more further ado, I will hand over to her, but I will let you know that after the presentation, you will be able to ask questions. If you prefer, you can write them in the chat, or you can just ask questions in the end, and I will try to lead the conversation. So I will now hand over to Sam.
Thank you, Therese. So you perhaps recognize some of these people, but what do you think that they have in common? So we'll start from the left. So on the left-hand side, you have Malala Yousafzai, who is from Pakistan, who is an international advocate for girls' education. And she's actually the youngest person to have ever received a Nobel Prize. To her right, the top right-hand corner is Kelvin Doe, who is from Sierra Leone in Africa. And by the age of 13, he had made a battery capable of powering the surrounding homes in his community. And finally, we have Jack Andrika, who hails from the United States of America. And he was already on a mission by the age of 15 to develop a test for the early detection of pancreatic cancer. So together, these young people, they represent and show us what really is possible for today and for the future. And essentially, they exhibit key skills that will be required of young people to ensure that they can successfully navigate in our rapidly changing world. And in fact, in one of the conversations that we had with one of the coordinators of the career program, or the CP program, that we'll be speaking about today, when this coordinator was asked about what type of education that they think each young person should be engaging with, she noted that it's really getting them prepared for an employment market that isn't going to be linear. It looks more like a matrix. I would hope it is preparing them for lifelong learning. And we can readily see that the ideas presented in this quote, they really capture the aim of the organization that funded this research project. And I will now once again invite my colleague, Professor Therese Hopfenbeck, to provide some background information on this project, including a bit about our funders, the County of Kent, where the program was implemented, and the research team. Over to you, Therese. Sorry, Therese, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you. Probably many of you will know that the International Baccalaureate is an international organization which has schools around the world, and they have schools from primary to secondary to even the diploma program. So instead of, for instance, doing A levels, which some students will do in England, you can take an international diploma examination and go to university after. But one of the things which is very different in this project is that the Kent municipality started working on something which is called the career program, which has ideas back to something which was developed in Finland in 2004, which is more kind of thinking about career-related certificate and how you can actually pick up jobs not only specifically in universities, but pick up skills which is needed in the future job market. And one of the things which is very interesting is that Kent is a place in England where you traditionally do not have that many students who have entered universities or higher education. But this specific program was developed to try to support students which came from more challenging backgrounds. We have discussed what kind of words we would use to describe it. And we would say perhaps more disadvantaged backgrounds. Some of the students in this program has not had any family members who've ever gone to universities. But the CP program in Kent offered opportunities for students to pick up skills which would support them in their career. And that is one of the reasons why also IB wanted us to look at how did Kent develop this program, how was it implemented from 2012 until 2016, and all the way up to our time now in 2019, 20, and 21. And is it possible to learn anything, any lessons drawn about the way schools and municipalities, coordinators work together to try to improve students' lives in Kent. And the next slide, Sam. And again, I will say that this all started before the pandemic. So when we had conversations with IB about the possibility of evaluating this program in Kent, it was pre-pandemic times. And I just wanted to show and honor that we had research members starting working in this program, such as Dr. Kit Double, and also Dr. Caroline Cresswell, who worked with us during the pandemic. And now, in the end, it has been Sam, who's presenting together with me, and also Associate Professor Josh McRae, who has been working on the final report, which we have just submitted and signed off. And I think it's a typical project where you see that you start out with one team and you end up with different team members because we have lived through and are still working through a pandemic situation. So this is just to show you and say thank you also to everyone who has been involved and is named on this final report.
Thank you, Therese. So perhaps you might be wondering a bit more about what the IB career program or the CP and what does it involve. So for brevity, I will sometimes refer to this program as the CP. So with that said, the CP is really designed for students between the ages of 16 to 19 years old, and its aim, as embodied in its name, is really to ensure that students are sufficiently equipped with relevant skills to embark upon future opportunities, including gaining relevant skills for their future careers, as Therese just mentioned. So by participating in the CP, students are given the opportunity to merge academic studies, which involves engaging with diploma-based subjects, and with the CP core, which involves engaging with community service and learning a new language, for example. And they do this alongside engaging in more career-related learning, in which the students can experience what it is really like to be in an authentic work setting. And really the aim of this program is to ensure that by the end, the student exhibit the skills and embody specific attributes that will ensure their success in the future and that they are able to contribute meaningfully to society. So for example, it is important that students, they think critically, they are self-starters, meaning that they take initiative, they are confident and collaborative, as well as curious, and they are able to inquire about the world around them. And even when they experience difficulty, they continue to exhibit high levels of resilience. And in fact, our project is quite timely, especially because previous research has really magnified the need for the implementation of quality career preparation programs. So for example, in a recent project by the OECD, which is an international organization, the students from a range of countries, they provided their own perspectives on the extent to which they felt ready to successfully transition from high school. So a student from Spain said, "My school would teach us how to recite 7 poems in 5 different languages, but didn't prepare us sufficiently for life after education. I left not understanding anything about the world of work." Another student from Ireland said, "I'd have loved it if at school, 1 day a week, we heard from people doing different professions to tell us about what their job was all about, what you need to do to get into it, how the work is, what sort of life you can expect." And finally, a student from Chile noted that, "My school didn't even have a guidance counselor, so I had to seek that guidance elsewhere." And we've also found that in previous research, it has been identified that 78% of students from low socioeconomic areas are less likely to have conversations about future opportunities, including the types of jobs that they would like to engage with after they finish their education. So together, these findings, they really provide a suitable context for the importance and the timeliness of our own study that we'll be presenting here this evening, as the sentiments expressed by these students, they readily support the point that they are not being sufficiently equipped with the necessary skills to acquire and to thrive in post-secondary opportunities. And this is a particular concern for students from under-resourced areas. So against this background, the aim of our study was really to evaluate the implementation of the IB career-related program within Kent, UK, and this area, as Terry has previously mentioned, or at least a large part of this county is under-resourced. So the overarching question that we asked was, what are the key success implementation strategies behind the Kent project? And to answer this question, we asked 4 sub-questions. Firstly, we wanted to know what student outcomes have the CP achieved. We also wanted to know who or what enabled the CP implementation. It was also important to examine the challenges with the implementation, as well as any sort of recommendations that participants had to ensure that the implementation of the program in Kent is strengthened. So I'll hand it now back over to Therese once again to speak a bit about our approach to answering these questions.
Thank you. Yeah, originally we wanted to visit these schools and talk to people, and we wanted to collect data in different ways. One thing which was still the same was obviously the document analysis. We looked at all the documentation we had from IB, which clarified the strategy, the ideas, the philosophy behind the CP model, and looked at policy relevant documents, almost 500 pages, which we read through and to try to understand what is the philosophy behind it. Then we set up online semi-structured group interviews because we couldn't go to Canton and interview people in person. And it was at the time when Teams and Zoom were still early days. So this was actually the first research study we had where we did collect data. And I have to say, it was a pleasant surprise, but it was strange to collect data at the time where we were early in lockdown. And it was hard for some of the students because schools were closed and they were sitting at home. So we worked a lot on how to prepare them and make sure everyone felt safe in this new environment. We had interviews with a total of 31 students, and we also had interviews with a total of 30 staff members in different schools. And we have collected data from 10 different schools in Kent, interview data. And we also had surveys, which we collected, and that was easier in a way to collect this survey data just using online surveys. So you can see that we had a total of 157 students who responded to surveys, and also staff who 78 of them responded to our surveys. And I think one of the good things about this is that we were also able to reach some of those we did not interview. So we have a solid number of schools involved. And some of the teachers we interviewed, they had been what they call coordinators of the program, but we also had new members who had come to Kent to specifically work on this. We also built all the interviews up on what we learned from the pilot interviews, which was also interviewing staff members who were seen as key people for the whole Kent model. And I think that is important to acknowledge in the beginning of this study. We have been informed by people who really wanted change in Kent. So key actors told us how they came to Kent and wanted to make changes, and they were part of setting up the whole process, and without them, probably a lot of this would not have happened. So the next slide, Sam. And one thing which is important also to see is that our document analysis show that to be able to succeed, there needs to be a strong focus on equipping students with skills for both academic and non-academic pathways. And as you will see from the interviews later, that seems to be a key. The same with the CP incorporates the key IB philosophy, international mindedness, approach to teaching, and the IB learner profile. And for those of you who are not familiarized with IB learner profile, we can just say that it's very much student-centered. So the teaching is supposed to take the student perspectives into account and try to figure out how the teaching can focus upon how to strengthen the students and also have an active student role. That also goes hand in hand with being internationally minded and open. And I think that was also something you will see in the results from the IB interviews, that students have this open-mindedness to the world. Next slide, Sam.
Thank you, Therese. So for the remainder of our talk, I will address the research questions in the order that they appear on this slide, and through our presentation, it is our hope that you will essentially have a better understanding of not only the outcome of the implementation, but also the process of the implementation, including, for example, how the program might be strengthened. So we also hope that as we present the findings, you will take some time to reflect on even your own context, as well as how a similar approach might be taken within your own particular context, where applicable. And as you listen, you might also have some questions, as Therese earlier mentioned. You might also have comments or even suggestions about the implementation process. And we ask you to make a note of these, as there's some time at the end of the talk for us to exchange the ideas. So let's start with the first question. What student outcomes have the CP achieved? So we analyze administrative data for students in Kent who completed the CP. Examination data, they show that 92% of students achieved the CP certificate. And we also observe successful outcomes for the different pathways with which students decided to engage following their participation in the CP program, with 20% of students being gainfully employed in several fields, including, as you can see on the slide here, construction, business, education, hospitality, marketing. And we found that quite a few students have transitioned into various apprenticeship roles, including working on really timely projects with Pfizer. So as mentioned earlier, the CP also provides students with the requisite skills to transition into further education, so tertiary education. And to this end, we found from the analysis that post-CP outcomes showed that 55% of students have successfully matriculated into university, and several of these students are pursuing degrees in law, in psychology, nursing, and some have even opted to combine university and work-based pathways, as you can see here on the slide. Now, the students across these universities, they're located across several universities, both locally and internationally. And some of these universities are part of the Russell Group, including the University of Cambridge and the University of Liverpool. So for persons in the audience who might not be familiar with the term Russell Group, these universities are equivalent to the American Ivy League of prestigious universities such as Harvard and Yale. But more importantly, I just want to pause here to put this finding into context and really highlight that for most of these students who participated in the CP, they were the first to attend university in their families. So while the program was successful, which is pleasing to see in providing students with these pathways, it is even more special for this reason. In fact, through participating in the CP in Kent, students now had a greater capacity to aspire to and access pathways that were not previously available to their own family members. So it was quite encouraging to see that overall, based on these student outcomes, the implementation of the CP was successful in achieving its goal in Kent. However, we were quite curious to find out the factors that contributed to these successful outcomes. How did such a large percentage of students achieve the CP certificate, and how did the program ensure that students could successfully transition into either academic or career-based pathways, or perhaps, as you've seen on the earlier slide, a mixture of both? Now, to answer this, we turn our attention now to sharing with you the key factors that led to such successful outcomes. So based on thematic analysis of interviews, and this included interviews with students, staff, and staff members included coordinators, teachers, school leaders, principals, and key stakeholders from the Kent community, as well as or from our analysis of staff and student survey data, we identified 4 themes that underpin these successful outcomes. So starting from the outer circle, these include the role of the Kent Community Network, a shared whole school vision, teacher collaboration, and the CP student. Now, I will talk about each of these themes and highlight some of the key ways in which they lead to successful implementation of the CP in Kent. But I also want to emphasize that although each theme is presented separately, we know from previous research, especially through the research by Bronfenbrenner, that their impact was not likely to be independent. So this essentially means that it is likely that all these 4 levels or factors work together to ensure the successful implementation of the CP. So the first theme is really centered around the Kent Community Network. To provide you with some context, this network actually didn't exist before the implementation of the CP in Kent. The network is underpinned by strong partnership work between the Kent local authority, key stakeholders from the International Baccalaureate Organization, and others with senior leadership roles within partner schools involved in the early setup or the early piloting of the CP implementation in Kent. So from the interviews, it was highlighted that the establishment of this network was central to the initial setup of the program in Kent. And here's what one of the school leaders in the network had to say about the Kent Community Network. We meet on a set practical level, coordinators and heads of sixth form, and senior leaders will meet with each other and with other schools that are running the program at different stages about sort of practical things at a subject level or at a coaching or support or mentoring level. So from this perspective of this school leader, as well as similar sentiments that we observe being expressed through the interviews, this network was quite pivotal for providing the groundwork for successful implementation, as it provided an opportunity for different stakeholders to exchange knowledge and information about best practices that could be applied within their own school context. And in a sense, it provided the first opportunity for CPT members to receive guidance and training from more experienced person. And in fact, our survey data with the CP teachers supported the important role of this initial training. And we found that 91% of the CP staff, they rated initial training for the CP team as the 3rd most important factor for the successful implementation of the CP. So we know from previous research and experiences that implementing a new program can definitely be a costly venture. So based on the results from the staff survey, it was not surprising when we found that 9 of the 14 key stakeholders in our study highlighted it was quite expensive to implement the CP in Kent, particularly for the initial setup and training costs. So therefore, another reason why the establishment of the Kent Community Network was important was that it reduced the cost of the CP implementation. And one of the key stakeholders noted that it kept the cost down by bringing people together. We negotiated better arrangements and made it a lot more possible. Now, one way that the network helped to reduce costs was that they worked together and negotiated group funding arrangements for initial CP training through the Kent Local Authority, which really helped to ease the burden and reduce the cost for individual schools, particularly for state non-selective schools. And for those of us, again, who might not be familiar with the UK system, state non-selective schools are usually under-resourced. So it was even more burdensome for these schools to achieve these costs of participating in the program, but they were able to do so through assistance from this Kent Community Network. And a final benefit of the Kent Community Network was that it helped to foster staff buy-in. So as school leader one here shared with us, they liked the connection with other schools in Kent. There was great community and a community feeling of schools supporting each other. And this essentially meant that it encouraged staff to see the real benefit of participating in the CP. And it really answered their question regarding the why of the program. Why is the program important to implement within their schools, and how might it be beneficial for them as educators and for their students as future global citizens? And in fact, through discussion with key stakeholders and school leaders, we learned that the initial Kent Community Network, or the Kent Hub as they referred to it as, it was so successful and beneficial to the to the success of the CP implementation that it led to the development of 2 additional networks to help with program implementation. So we've spoken about the role of the Ken Community Network. Now we'll turn our attention to this idea, or the second theme that we identified as being important for the successful implementation of the CP, which is centered around this concept of a shared whole school vision. So simply put, everyone needs to be on the same page, but this whole school vision should be underpinned by leaders who, as one of the key stakeholders noted, have forward vision and an openness to innovate. And in fact, the importance of having this buy-in or this support from leadership was rated as the most important factor in terms of the support that is needed to ensure that the CP implementation was successful, with 97% of staff supporting this view. And in fact, the same key stakeholder emphasized that the reason why such a forward-thinking leader is needed is because there is an element of risk. It being the implementation of CP, it's a less trodden, less known pathway, and it really asks schools to look beyond the things that they are used to. So not only that, but it was further emphasized that it was not enough for this commitment to be horizontal, meaning that it was not sufficient for the shared vision to just be represented only during the levels that were implementing the career program. Instead, we found through the interviews and from surveys that the participants in our study emphasized the importance and value of embedding the ethos of what the CP represents very early on in the lower grade. So one way of doing this, as one of the key stakeholders shared, was using the IB learner profile. And to give you some context about this learner profile, it really is the hallmark of the IB program at all levels. And this profile essentially describes the range of attributes that all IB students, including those that participate in the CP, should be able to demonstrate because of their involvement in the program. And early on, I introduced some of these concepts, these attributes, and as a reminder, these include, but they're not limited to, being a critical thinker, being curious, and being reflective. These are part of the IB learner profile. So the participants in this current study expressed that when these attributes are embedded not only within the CP, but throughout the entire school, they expect that this will ensure a greater shared understanding across the school about the importance of the CP. And when that occurs, this helps to drive the success of the implementation. And I think that this idea was captured quite well by one of the key stakeholders, who said, you go into schools and the IBs all over the school. It's not just for the CP. The teachers are teaching aspects of the CP, but they're also teaching year 7. So it's pervaded the whole school, not just the 6th form. And in fact, in our staff survey, we found that 94% of CP staff rated the promotion of CP within the school as the second most important factor for successful CP implementation. And then finally, it was important for this whole school vision to be present at specific levels as identified by our participants, particularly among school governance, parents, CP staff, and students. So together, this essentially exhibited a shared commitment by multiple stakeholders in relation to ensuring that the program was a success. And I think one of the key stakeholders captured this idea best when they said there was huge support from every level. From school governance to parents, it was streamlined within our school context, including staff and including students. And it was a contagion because the CP implementation, was just so successful. So we've discussed the role of the Ken Community Network, this idea of the shared whole school vision. The next factor that was really important, the third factor that we identified as underpinning the successful implementation of the CP, was really surrounding this idea of teacher collaboration. So according to school leaders, the CP teachers, they were very keen to form smaller working groups that would enable them to exchange ideas on best practices. And in fact, we found that one of the school leaders shared that we never have a week where I don't get a member of staff coming down saying, I've got an idea and I want to get a working party. A big part of that, which is a successful CP implementation, has been down to those sorts of mechanisms within the IBCP that encourage collaboration. And in fact, survey data supported the importance of teacher collaboration, and we found that 91% of CP staff reported that collaboration between teachers within a school was the third most important factor for successful implementation of the CP. And this finding really aligns with previous research, particularly the research by John Hattie, who has identified teacher collaboration as one of the most robust predictors of advancing student learning outcomes. But several teachers also expressed that teacher collaboration was also enhanced by leveraging their own personal international networks. And here we see a teacher using her own contact who was based internationally to clarify something in her subject area. So this teacher shared that she's actually used the international contact to clarify certain things. And she goes on to say, I think it's important. It does place the onus on staff as well to build up support networks both in the school, with local schools, and of course beyond. And then finally, teachers utilize, of course, the power of social media networks to strengthen the teacher collaboration process. And pictured here is just one of the several examples of online CP groups. And this one is hosted via Facebook. In fact, one of the teachers noted it's great because there's a massive community out there on social media where people discuss ideas and come together. And so that's a way of us really developing our knowledge. And it's great you can have this international approach to doing a curriculum. So together, in terms of teacher collaboration, we see that teachers are really driving the collaborative process. And as a result of this, several teachers have noted that this made them feel quite empowered, and they felt higher levels of flexibility in the ways in which they were able to deliver the CP. And then finally, the final theme, or really the factor that contributed to a successful outcome, is this idea of the CP student. So this theme, it's quite unique as it is both an outcome of the implementation, meaning that it really embodies the attributes that one would expect from a student who has participated in the program. But interestingly for us, we found that this theme also represents a factor that led to the successful CP implementation. So back in my home country of Jamaica, there is a well-known saying by Marcus Garvey. And for persons who don't know who Marcus Garvey is one of our national heroes. And he said, without confidence, you are twice defeated in the race of life. And we know from previous research about the importance of self-confidence and achievement outcomes, such that more confident students are more likely to perform better, to be more engaged, and to be more motivated. So through participating in the program, we see students regaining this sense of confidence in themselves and their abilities. And one student shared that through this quote, mental health and people's self-confidence is at an all-time low, especially with all this COVID going on. It's nice to actually work on those skills and start getting a bit of confidence back in yourself. So the CP student is a confident student, and when, as I said, more confidence leads to wanting to be more invested and making sure that you're successful in the program. We also found that the CP student is also confident in their ability to collaborate with and learn from others who may also come from different cultural backgrounds. So although they understand the importance of, although students in the program, when we interview them, they understood the importance of independent work, the CP student really acknowledges and sees the positive outcomes from engaging in collaborative endeavors. So here, a year 13 student expressed that, I think the community that IB creates is really important. We can read each other's reflective projects, which is really a big project that they engage with in the CP, help each other out, talk to each other. It's like group achievement. And then finally, the CP student is a well-rounded student and equipped with the requisite skills to transition into varied pathways. And as Terry mentioned earlier, through the findings of the document analysis, we found that students are readily equipped to engage in maybe employment, or if they want to go to further education. And importantly, I just want to highlight here that although the majority of students, which is 78%, were happiest with the career aspect of the program as shown here, it should be emphasized that the CP does not prioritize a career pathway over an academic pathway or vice versa. But the key point that we want to highlight here is that by clarifying and making these benefits visible to students, it really helps them to better appreciate the value of participating in the program and the type of student that it cultivates. And when students can visibly see these benefits, it likely leads to them really applying themselves and wanting to be successful, and hence making the actual implementation overall a successful venture. So we've spoken about the outcomes and we've spoken about the key success factors of the CP. But in any implementation, there are challenges, which is also a great opportunity to learn how to strengthen program implementation. And in fact, when we talk about challenges in our study, challenges of the implementation, more often than not, participants in our study often reflected on both the challenge and suggested recommendations alongside these challenges. So this is the approach that we will take. We'll present some of the challenges and then the recommendations. So participants, especially teachers and students, they emphasize that one of the biggest challenges was convincing others about the value of the CP. So while they themselves appreciated the value of the CP and what it was able to offer, the CP and what the CP and the structure is able to offer, unfortunately, the CP is not as well known as outside of the program, and it's not well known as the A levels, for example. And in fact, this can be quite problematic, as several students noted that although they were able to meet the matriculation requirements for university, for example, this was after explaining to the university admissions team about how the structure of the CP is comparable to A levels. So therefore, both staff and students recommended one way to really improve the implementation of the CP was to elevate the value of the CP, particularly by having promotional strategies to help employers and universities to see the benefits of employing a CP student or of a CP student attending their own university. Several students also highlighted that engaging in the CP meant that they had a heavier workload, which meant that sometimes it was quite challenging for them to find time to spend time with their friends or families or engage in social activities. And even though they did see the value as a recommendation, they noted that it would be quite prudent for the program to deliver its contents more strategically. So for example, specific projects that start in second year, so for example, the reflective project, they highlighted that this project could be started in the first year instead, so that they have a longer time to finish the project. Similarly, students also noted that when these assignments are given, they would appreciate greater clarity in the assessment criteria, which would really help them to better organize their time and also to reduce their workload. And finally, the teachers noted a big thing was that there was a lack of access to ongoing training, which was quite challenging. So while they appreciated the initial training and also the teacher collaboration, they noted that one of the biggest recommendations that would really help them for the program to be even more successful was that it would be useful for them to be provided with additional resources, and this could be provided during their initial training as well as during the delivery of the actual CP. So we will speak now briefly about some of the limitations of our study. So we found that the study was quite valuable, and similar to the challenges and recommendations, we always see the limitations as a really viable way of really improving the methodology of the study, but also strengthening the implementation of the CP. So I'll speak very briefly about some of these limitations. So although our study has captured the voices and experiences of a wide range of students, including wide range of individuals, including students, staff, leaders, and key stakeholders, as we showed in our methodological approach, it would be quite prudent for future research studies to include additional stakeholders such as parents, employers, and representatives from universities, for example. And we see this as being very important because in the earlier slide that I just presented is that ever so often universities and future employers might not readily know of the value of the CP. So by including the voices of these additional stakeholders in interviews, for example, we would have a richer understanding of how the CP might partner with these entities to maximize the outcome of the implementation. Now, the second limitation is really centered around the nature of the relationships between the variables in this study. So what this simply means, or what we mean by this, is that although we have found that, for example, teacher collaboration likely leads to students being successful, we can't make any sort of conclusions about which aspects of success does teacher collaboration, or in fact, any of the factors that we discuss contribute to a specific outcome. So, for example, does teacher collaboration lead to a higher percentage of students achieving the CP certificate, or does it lead to students being able to matriculate into university, or both perhaps? So we definitely need future research to clarify these questions. And finally, we have only collected data sort of cross-sectionally, and as such, our data does not really permit us to advance the long-term impact of these practices upon student outcomes across time, across a long period of time. And it's always good to have longitudinal studies. So therefore, one of the recommendations for future research studies would really benefit from adopting a longitudinal approach in assessing the impact of the implementation of the CP. So finally, despite these limitations, our research through evaluating the CP, we were able to provide evidence of the ways in which the implementation in Kent really contributed to advancing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And more specifically, this implementation contributed to providing quality education, which is goal 4. And it really helped to ensure that students were equipped with the requisite skills to transition into meaningful employment, which from previous studies, we know it really helps to grow economies. The CP program also contributed to reduced inequalities, as it provided a platform for students from under-resourced contexts to really upskill and really have that capacity to aspire. And finally, the partnership among IB, which is the International Baccalaureate, and different stakeholders included the Ken local authority, the senior leaders from the school. Through this key partnership, it really achieved the overarching goal of preparing students for the future. So overall, it was encouraging that the CP implementation in Kent was definitely a successful venture. And this was successful because of the 4 main factors that we identified, which are the Kent Community Network, this idea of a shared whole school vision, teacher collaboration, and the CP student. But more importantly, we end by asking you to ponder upon how might these factors, how might they be useful for your own context? For those who are interested, and this session will be recorded, we're just sharing some recommended readings, so perhaps you can revisit the recording or share it with relevant persons who were unable to be here for this session. So these are just some of the recommended readings around project implementation and talking about this idea of students from under-resourced contexts being able to have that capacity to aspire. So thank you again for joining our presentation, and we are quite excited to hear your questions, your comments, your suggestions, and perhaps you might even have some recommendations.